Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in this part of our Batman tutorial we're going to be taking a look at this cape. Now I've taken over this one section from Jay because I'm going to be using Marvelous Designer to simulate out this cloth material and get this kind of look. Now using the techniques Jay's been teaching you over the course of this tutorial, you could sculpt this or something very similar to it out of a polygon plane, for instance. But we want something that gives us a little bit more flexibility, that gives us the ability to animate it later on. And a design like this is really not that difficult to do. And Marvelous Designer is becoming quite an industry tool right now. So we thought we'd give you this brief look, if you've never used it before, on how to do some quite simple cloth simulations and get some really fantastic looking results in a quite short space of time. So for this I'm going to be using Maya 2017 and Marvelous Designer 5.5 I think. Although the versions are not really important, we're going to be doing some really simple stuff in both, so pretty much any version of Maya, any version of Marvelous Designer will work with this kind of simple workflow I'm going to show you. So first we need the model you've been working on. Now Jay has sent me a copy which I will make available, or he will make available for you guys. It'll be in the data directory of your Batman project and it will be called Batman for Simulation. So just go ahead and open that up. You'll get a warning on the OBJ that there are some faces intersecting, which is fine. This is just basically telling us that this is a combined mesh. As you can see, it all looks like one piece, whereas if you've been following along with this, you know the head, the body, the shoes are all separate pieces. Now you'll notice this is coming black. That's probably because we have flipped normals on this. Now this could become an issue for us within the simulation process. I mean, it's not normally, but some simulation engines will take flip normals as a sign that the surface is not solid and in fact pass through. So we're going to want to clean anything like that up. And if you're wondering how I'm seeing that, if you've got a lighting, and I'm sure Jay's told you this, I've got two-sided lighting turned on. So if you have that turned off, you'll basically see this as, you know, normal, no defect. So you're going to want to go ahead most of the time when you're modeling and flip that on just to have a look around. Right, so first things first, let's fix the normals on this, and because we're combined at the moment, let's mesh and separate, and then let's grab this and then just fix the normals. So mesh display, normals, reverse. There you go. So as we can see, we've got no other reverse normals that might cause us a problem down the line. No, it looks perfect. So let's go ahead and group this thing. Now I'm not going to combine it again just yet. What I'm going to do is just group it. And we need to really talk about scale, because Marvelous Designer, on the settings I use it as, sees 1 centimeter in Maya as 1 meter. Now you can also go centimeter for centimeter, meter for meter, but as we're working in this scale right now, rather than scale this up in centimeters so it's huge, I'm going to scale it down. You know, any way works as long as you're working in the same units in both. So let's say now one grid across is 1 centimeter in Maya, so we know that will be 1 meter in Marvelous Designer. So we're going to make this Batman guy about 2 meters high, and a real simple way to do that without having to resort to getting the measuring tools out and whatnot is just take this poly box, scale it up to 2 on all axes, make sure that it's on the grid there, that'll do. And you really don't have to be perfect with this, folks. Cloth will simulate differently on different sized objects. It's the same with end cloth. Or practically the same with every simulation app you'll ever use, for good reason. You know, there would be a bit of a difference between, say, a huge banner falling from a large skyscraper than a cape draped over your shoulder, and the applications we'll be take this into effect. So we want to make sure the scale is right, but you know, don't go too nuts. If it's 1 meter 80 or 2 meters 20, it's not going to make a huge difference. You know, or 6 foot or 7 foot, whatever units you're comfortable with. Right, so we need to grab the group on this, so I'm going to pop open the outliner here. Outliner, and there we go. So we've just got a basic group. I'm going to scale that down till it's about the same height as the box, and that will give me a scale of about 2 meters. There we go. Now another thing to take into consideration is we're going to want to put this back to the original scale that you chaps have been working with. You know, nothing's going to annoy someone you're working with more than giving them back a bunch of simulated data that doesn't fit what they're actually working with. And then you don't know what the scale is, and they have to just kind of manually scale everything up by eye, and it just becomes a bit of a pain. So make a note of what you scaled that group down to, just in case we need to undo that change later on, because we're going to have to recombine this guy, so it's probably going to lose its scale data. So it's a very good idea is, as soon as you've got your scale, make a note of these numbers. Now they should all be the same, of course. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put a little animation on this. Now this isn't so much a kind of walk cycle or a jump off a building or anything like that. This is a very specific animation targeted for Marvelous Designer. Because for a start, we're not going to be able to work with this head here. That's not going to happen. Because we're going to drape cloth from the shoulders kind of across the deltoid here and then down the back and onto the floor. So if we've got a head in the way, that's going to be neither use nor ornament for us. The problem with this is, though, if the head's not there and we later on decide to animate the cape, none of this cowling will be forcing the cape down. So a rather simple way to deal with this is to lift the head out the way, hit S on your keyboard to keyframe the head, go to generally I use 50 frames maybe, depending on how complex your cloth is going to be, but 50 should do it for this. And then I'm going to move the head back to its original position by just going up to its translate Y and setting that back to 0, and then hitting S again, which will keyframe it. And then we'll have an animation that goes like this. So when we bring this into Marvelous Designer, we will end up with a space we can work, and once the cloth has really started to settle down, we'll set the simulation animation off. The hood will come down, forcing the cloth onto the body in exactly the right places and saving us both a whole job of work in Marvelous Designer and in Maya in the cleanup process later on. Now the other thing I want to do to this guy is put a fake neck in, because right now, because the cowl is on here, I don't really have a neck to work with, so I want something I can easily fasten a cape to. So I'm just going to put a polycylinder here. This doesn't matter, doesn't matter what it looks like so much. We're just going to use it as a fastening object as part of a simulation. So, you know, it really doesn't have to be neck-like at all. We're just going to use it as a kind of proxy object for our cloak. What we don't want it to do is bisect the geometry in the front too much or the back too much. So I'm going to scale that down. And we don't need it that big. Let's slide back the timeline here and pull the head off, make sure. See, and this gives us something we could pin our cloak to in place of a neck, which obviously in this model is modelled into the actual cowl itself. Okay, so I'm going to drop that box. I'm going to rewind this, and then we need some way of getting this into Marvelous Designer. So in order to do this, one of the simplest ways is just to combine the whole lot. So Mesh Combine. Okay, at its simplest level, Marvelous doesn't really have a lot of tools for dealing with multiple meshes in the same way that Maya does. So the simplest way for us to do this is to recombine those back. Your animation will still be on them. And now we can make an Alembic cache of that. So let's go Alembic and export selection to Alembic. There we go. And you'll see that saves in your project folder and then cache Alembic. So I'm just going to call this Batman Proxy Mesh. Okay, there we go. And you'll see my timeline is going, my head's going on, and everything seems hunky-dory. Now, I didn't really line that neck up very well, but we really shouldn't need to. But again, one of those things, the longer you spend making sure nothing's bisecting or whatnot, the better off you're going to be. I'm just honestly trying not to bore you to tears. Right, let me just check that Alembic cache a second. Export all to Alembic, and I've got the start and end point set on 40. I wanted it on 50. I thought I noticed that it didn't go quite all the way to the end there. So let's just go to overwrite that one. Export all. Yes, do you want to export all? I do. So that should now export 50 frames instead of 40. Okay, so that's basically all we needed Maya for, hence why I said you could pretty much use any version of it. Now, you don't have to worry about smoothing this in Maya. It will come into Marvelous Designer smoothed. So let's pop open Marvelous Designer. And if you haven't used this before, it's the basic interface. Now, rather than trying to explain what each button does before we start using it, I like to teach by just starting to use it, and this is all going to be quite basic, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along. And really it is quite simple. It's, file open, and then you've got your 3D garments and your 2D patterns, which we'll go into in some detail. But for right now, we just want to import what Marvelous Designer calls an avatar. Now, if this is the first time you've opened the program, you're probably looking at one of their standard avatars, because it comes loaded in. So you want to go to Avatar, delete all avatars, and that will get rid of it. And you're probably looking at a little red dress now with the pattern for it over here. So you'll need to go to File, New, and that will clear away any patterns and any avatars Marvelous Designer has in there. Then you're going to want to go to File, Import an Alembic. Okay, and then just navigate to wherever you save that out. So for me, that's my Z folder, and this would be Batman Cape. There we go. And Cache, Alembic, Batman, Proxy Mesh. There it is. Now, if you remember, we were in Maya in centimeters, but we wanted it read into Marvelous in meters. So I'm going to select meters. There we go. Okay, and there is our mesh inside Marvelous Designer, ready for us to start adding the cloak to. Now, if we flip up here to the Animation tab, you can see that we do have the animation in here as well if I click play. So this is really going to allow us to settle that cowl on the completed cape. Now, in the next part, we'll take more of a look. I'm going to flick it back to simulation. We'll take more of a look at how to do patterns in Marvelous Designer, and then we'll take a look at draping the cloth, maybe adding a little bit of wind, upping the simulation quality, and finally doing the animation to settle down over the top and just bring us that nice cloth we're looking for. So this has gone on a little longer than I thought it might. But a few things in here. We could have done this without this nice drop down animation, but again, it's quite simple to set up and useful for all sorts of things within Marvelous Designer. So I'm just trying to give you guys a few ideas here of maybe not just this simple cape, but other things you could do and some of the ways that we do them. So I'll be back for the next part, just to finish this up, and then I'll be handing you back to Jay. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this somewhat interesting. Hi everybody and welcome back. So here we are inside Marvelous Designer with what they call our avatar loaded in, our Batman object. Now, before we get started, a few Marvelous Designer basics, because you can see me navigating around the 3D view here. So this is a bit like Maya. This is the basic perspective view, and this view here is creating patterns, and we'll get in that in a second. Now, if you're having trouble navigating this, you're going to want to go up to Settings and User Settings, and under the View Controls, you'll see my pan is all set to Maya. So by default, I think this just comes in on regular mouse, which has a different way of controlling this. But as a Maya user, you're going to want to set that to Maya, and then you've got your out left mouse for rotate, right mouse for pan and zoom, basically the same as Maya. So an environment you should be fairly comfortable with. So the other thing is, by default as well, the gizmo as they call it, which is the axis that comes up that lets you control things, is set to screen coordinates, which I really don't care for in 90% of circumstances. So if I just draw a piece of cloth here, this is the view where we draw patterns or bits of cloth, and this is the view where we manipulate them. So at the moment, our gizmo is set on screen coordinate, which means if I'm on move and I click, you'll see it comes in at very strange angles and changes according to the screen position. So that's going to rotate that in a very strange manner, and if I go up there, it's going to rotate it in an even stranger manner. Now, there's very few occasions when I've ever used this. Really, this is a very awkward way of getting things moved about most of the time. So you're probably going to want to go ahead, by all means try it and see if it suits your particular style. But as a Maya user, you're going to want to go ahead and probably set that on local coordinate, and then it comes in relation to the cloth itself. So if I delete that now, because the gizmo's a bit out of whack because we had it on those screen coordinates, and just go up to here and select rectangle and just draw one, you'll see wherever I click, that's where this gizmo appears. Now, I prefer a more traditional Maya style with it always kind of being in the middle, and other ways to do this, but this is just how Marvelous works. So this local gizmo is certainly a lot easier than the screen one in any case. So that's basically our two views. You've got the view where you draw the pattern or your basic swathes of cloth. This is also where you stitch that cloth together. And if you've ever done any sort of basic sewing of patterns for jumpers or shirts, trousers, whatever, you'll be quite intimately aware with this. The other thing is that this program was originally designed for and still is used quite heavily by the fashion industry. So this actually can, well, be used for your 3D work, but any pattern you put together in here that works in here, you can actually go and sew up. So, you know, it's used for a lot of things like complicated cosplay costumes, and, you know, fashion students use it to test out new ideas, and of course us 3D guys, Doctor Strange, a lot of the cape work and stuff in that was done in Marvelous Designer. So it's getting quite a good reputation within the industry. It's been used for a while now. So draw cloth here, basically move cloth and simulate it here. So if you just want to see what a cloth simulation looks like in MD before we go any further, I can just go up here and hit simulate. It'll go through a drapery process, and ta-da, we are done. Now this is fairly medium detailed cloth right now. We can take the simulation a lot finer, and if you want to stop the simulation, you can just click here. While it's running, however, one interesting thing you can do is you can pick it up and move it about, which makes the look dev of the cloth, you know, getting the look you're going for, and maybe you want to pull it off the shoulder a little bit over there and a little bit over there, it makes it slightly more intuitive than something like N cloth, for instance. It makes the process much faster. So if we were to just you know, pull this back here, for instance, we'd end up pulling it right off the mesh if we pulled it hard enough. You know, you get the idea. Simulation wise, this is a bit easier than, I mean, we've already got kind of a basic cape here. If we just pull this back a little bit and let it settle, you know, we're halfway home, folks, and it took all of a few seconds. I mean, we're going to do a bit more complicated pattern, but, you know, because this is obviously going to be a little lopsided and whatnot, and this is not how you go about making a cape, but several seconds in Marvelous Designer and one piece of cloth later, and look at that, we've got a beautiful piece of drapery. Easy as pie, really. Now, if you want to reset this cloth back to the last place you had it before you started to simulate, it's this button here, Reset 3D Arrangement, which will reset it above the neck, or you can hit Reset it all together, and that will put it back where it was originally created. So anyway, let's get rid of that and talk about patterns. Now, a cape is not just a square rectangle coming off the shoulders like so, because then it's going to hang off the shoulder. Let's just move this. It's going to hang off the shoulder, and these ends are going to touch the floor, and this end is going to be up here, and there's nothing to fasten it to the neck. So what do? Well, we know that Marvelous Designer is used in the fashion industry, and we know that you can use it to put sewing patterns together. So realistically, any piece of cloth that you want to create for MD, whether it be a pair of trousers, a hat, a jacket, in our case a cape, you can find all the information necessary from sewing patterns. Because that's literally what we're going to do. We're going to take pieces of cloth and sew them together around the model. So if I have a look here, I think I have a sewing pattern. Now, I probably won't include this with a tutorial because I can't remember where I found it from. I think it was just on Google search, but I don't obviously want to include material that I don't have a right to. But I think it came from a very old archive magazine, so probably well out of copyright. And if you just search for cape sewing pattern, you'll find lots like this. But the basic pattern is a hole for the neck, something to fasten around the shoulders, bits on the arm, and a flared bottom. like this. So we're not actually going to load this into MD and copy it. It's just an example of how a cape should look. What we're going to rather do is, this is rather simple. We're going to get in there, get it the approximate length, taper it out a bit at the bottom, put these holes in, and then we're going to adjust it on the fly. Marvelous Designer simulates so quickly that it really allows us to get in there and really start tailoring this look straight away. So let's start off with a rectangle. Now you can also create a polygon, you can create internal lines and curves, and you can sew things together. That's basically all this is. So over here we have simulate, move, select mesh box as pin, which would be for pinning things to either the avatar or together, and then you have another form of pinning. You have the reset the patterns, we've got here, play motion, edit textures. None of this we're really going to be doing this time. Piping we'll use for around the outside of the cloak, which we'll go into in a second, and press, which is a bit like an iron, which presses two garments together. Again, not much use for us here. Then over here we have move, translate, and various curvature tools, various create cloth tools, so create a polygon, a rectangle, or a circle, then internal lines on the cloth, and then basically very specific things like creating pleats. Down here we have some sewing, and here we have some stuff to look at textures and UVs. We'll be using the standard UVs it creates, and the texturing we'll obviously be doing with J, probably in Polypaint and ZBrush. So we won't need those, but just so you know, they are there. The program does a lot more than I'm going to show you now, but we're going to keep this nice and simple. So let's get some basic diameters out here. Now we know we want Batman's cape to be sort of as long as he is, so let's start out with that. Nice and easy. And from our cape pattern, we know we want it kind of flared on the bottom. So this is one bugbear I have with Marvelous Designer. If I click and drag around this, I'll get this point. And sometimes I'll end up with all of them. I'll try to move this one and the whole box moves. Now it doesn't matter where this is here, because you see it won't update in this window. So this is more for our reference. So just be aware that you really do have to click on that one point, and if you want it in a straight line, you have to start dragging it first and then press shift. Okay, and that will edit the cloth. Now I'm going to undo that, and if I press shift and try and drag it, for some reason it gets very grumpy about that and won't let me. So grab it first, press and hold, then press shift, then let's pull this out to a reasonable distance and pull this out, and you see what I mean. Instead of grabbing that one, it's grabbed both. So, and it's no longer locking properly. So it can be a bit fiddly. It does take a bit of getting used to. So just make sure you have one. Click outside the pattern to make sure there's nothing selected. Then click the one you want. Then click, then press shift, then bring it out. And I'm not going to be terribly accurate with this. Again, more time and effort, better result. But really for something this simple, it's not really necessary. Okay, so now we've got a basic cape shape. Let's go back and see what we can do about this. Now this is going to be too wide at the top. I'm really feeling like it is, so I'm going to shift it in a bit. And I say the nice thing is this will be so fast to simulate, we'll be able to make these changes on the fly, which is why this is a very beloved program in the fashion industry. So let's get up here. Let's put this about horizontal, move it up, and see how this drapes over the neck. Now we made it exactly as long as Batman was, but that's probably not going to be long enough because it's going to drape front and back. But let's just hit simulate and see what we get. Okay, that's actually not bad. We're just about hitting the floor there. But you see with this straight, you see what I'm talking about? When we saw the curved pattern. So these edges are hitting the floor, the back is not, just because of the way the drapery is working up here. So that's not really going to work. And also, I don't really like this coming over the shoulders. So if we refer back to our pattern, well actually that was my original pick, you'll see we've got a little indentation here and little indentations where the arms are, and this whole bottom part flares outwards. So let's take a go at that and see what that looks like. So, easiest way to do this is to use the Edit Curve tool, or actually the Edit Curvature, and I'm going to select this line and then I'm just going to curve it out. Bang, done. We are curved. Now you'll see that's had a little conniption there. It's gone through the floor, but we can fix that just by letting it simulate. That'll bounce up, it'll be a bit of hectic movement, and then it'll calm back down again. And we can just make sure that whole thing is kind of hitting the floor. I can actually grab it as it's going around. And really all I'm doing there is left mouse click and give it a drag in case it's getting a bit bunched up, and it will take, give it a few to simulate out. If you've ever tried to work with encloth of this density, you will now be very happy at the speed this thing is moving. And we got a little caught up on the floor there, but it doesn't matter. We're going to redrape this, and we could use also wind to blow it away, which is a very interesting technique with this to give us sort of more interesting creases. But for right now, we know we're at least at about the right length. So there we go. That's all the information we really wanted from this session. Now we want to work these arms in a bit, and if we just edit the curvature of this whole thing, that's not going to do it. That's really not what we're after. So first of all, I'm going to dip the neckline in a bit. Okay, and actually what I really want here is to dip that neckline in, and I'm going to refer back to my pattern here. So the neckline is dipped in, but not all the way like that. So I'm going to use an internal line. Actually, I don't need to. I can use this add point tool. So I'm going to add a point there, and I'm going to add a point here, and then I'm going to curve this part in. Because these parts I'm going to sew together to make sure the cloak stays around the throat. Okay, so then we've got that, and then we're going to want to pull in some armholes, probably fairly high up. So let's add another couple of points. So I've got a plus points. Just got one here maybe, and one here, and same on the other side. Okay, and then the curvature tool. And we're going to pull in some armholes. Now we can go back and edit these, like I say. This just gives us, fast enough that we can actually do this. Now if I click anywhere on this with the movement tool, it should appear on the cloth. So that currently is over there, but as we're going to stitch this part and this part together, that should probably take care of itself. Right, okay, let's reset this pattern. Right, and that's looking, somewhat close to the pattern that we have as a reference. There you go. One hole for the neck, one hole for the arms. I mean, this cape is not exactly what we're after, because this would be too big in this case. And we've got a cowl going over the top, so we don't really have to worry about collar detailing and whatnot. So nice and simple for us. Alright, so let's sew this part to this part. Now get the sewing machine out. There we go, this part to this part. And it does matter where that line is. And I'll show you in a second. You see that's connected together. Well, if you got your line in the wrong place, which is difficult to see, in fact it's so difficult to see, we're going to do a small unnecessary edit to this just to allow us to see these sewing lines a bit better. So let's come in here and stun it again, selected the whole thing, come in here and just move this one down a bit like so, and this one the same. This is going to allow us to see the sewing lines, which will make sense in a second, I promise. Okay, now I'm going to sew this to this again. Let's use the standard sewing, this to this. And you can see now that those lines are nice and straight and they're both all connecting together. Lovely. Now, watch what happens if I put one mark up here and then the other mark down here, and you'll see a crisscross. That's now crisscrossed. That'll all go terribly wrong. So if you want to delete your sewing, you can go up to Edit Sewing and just select it and select our sewing here and hit delete. There we go. You can also go into the Scene tab where you can see, if I put another stitch in, let's see here, there we go, you'll see seam line pair, and so you can click it. It works like the outliner in Maya. Now let's come here and let's move this. Oh, I actually hit simulate, but you will see it stitched together. There we go. But obviously that needs to be over the neck. So let's reset our pattern, not the whole thing, just back to where we were. Click it. That'll give us the gizmo, and I think that might do it. I think we might have to do a bit of manual tugging here to stop it falling all the way back. There we go. I just grabbed it there to make sure it didn't have too much of a conniption, and there we go. We have just draped a cape. Wasn't that easy? as somebody who spent many hours with Encloth doing this sort of thing, I am always extremely impressed with Marvelous Designer when I see something like that happen, because on the fly, with just one very ancient reference, we've managed to get pretty much what we were looking for out of this. Now, we did say we wanted the cape to go over the deltoids, so we could just give it a pull, settle it more into place where we wanted it, because it's got the right pattern for that. And again, just grab the cloth. Now this is a bit tricky. This bit here, right here, is definitely more art than science, Now, one thing I am seeing is we've got these armholes, and they're quite, I don't like that at all. Not happy, but not a problem. Let's just zoom out and look at the drapery on that. I mean, that's already starting to look fantastic to me. In fact, if it wasn't for that dot there, I'd just call that job done, put the cowl on and go home. It really is that useful, this thing. So for rapid look development and the quick manufacture of clothes, you really can't beat this tool at the moment. Okay, so there we go. So let's have a look at what else we could do. Now this is sharp because this is sharp. So let's come in here and get this edit curvature. And if I just grab this, it's done it again. Can I? Oh, maybe I'm on the wrong one. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, it's this one I need. So what was that tool called? That is called edit round corner. That's it. So this is kind of a round corner going onto a square. So we just click and drag and round that up a bit until we get exactly what we're looking for. So actually that's pretty good. Now one thing would be if we put wind on this at the moment, then it would have an issue. And the other thing is there's no pinning. So we can pin this to the avatar just to make sure it stays there nice and flat. So if we weren't using this cowl to pin it down, we can pin it. Now you can temporarily pin it with this pin to avatar here. So one in the cloak and one on the avatar. One on the cloak, one on the avatar, and that keeps your pinning in place. You'll see these move outwards. And this is really great for getting cloth where you want it to go. Say, stop simulation there. I need this bit further. That way I can just grab it and pin it and go, and you'll see it pull in. Excellent sort of quick pinning tool. But let's get rid of those. A more permanent solution to this is to just pin it. So I'm just in the edit base thing at the moment, so I'm just going to get rid of those, don't need them. Click back on the move tool and you'll see my cloak there goes back from fully transparent, and I'm just going to permanently pin this to the model. So if I click it here, you'll see that's there, that's there, that's there, that's there, that's there, that's there. Okay, so what we need pinning to the model is this whole section here. So I'm going to select pins, I'm going to click and hold to select lasso, and I'm pretty much going to lasso the whole top portion of that, if I can get it. There we go. Done. And we can see on the model what will pin, and now I can hit attach pin to avatar, and that will just pin it down. That's like I've stamped it there, it ain't moving, it's going to stay. When I simulate, you'll see that that just stays there. Okay, so you can delete all the pins by just going to delete pins, and then, just in case you made a bit of a dog's breakfast of that, because this is not the easiest lasso in the world, and then pin to avatar. So attach pins to avatar, attach all pins to avatar. There we go. And you'll see that's all pinned to the avatar. Simulate out, that ain't going nowhere. So even if we grab this cape now and let's go off the pin view and try and move it about, that's pinned. That's not going anywhere, which is very handy when it comes to sort of getting the look you're going for, doing these manual adjustments. Now I don't have to worry about accidentally pulling this thing right off the fake neck here. Now let's go and put his hat on, shall we? So here we go, from simulation to animation. And what this is going to do, it's going to put the cowl down and make sure all this is nicely, clamped on to our model. Now, of course, we could do a bit more simulation and move in, because these are a bit uneven on each side, but you know, that's a bit more art than science. You're just going to drag that about a bit, maybe redrape the pattern a few times to get exactly the look that you're going for. So now we're in the simulation menu. Let's just hit play. And we can see, just double check that our sim is working, and now we're going to hit record, and that will actually simulate out. So when it does these, this is set to pretty much a much higher simulation quality than we were using in the other one. So to do these 50 frames might take, I don't know, maybe a minute and a half, and again, compared to a lot of other cloth simulators, yeah, this is really fast, folks. So I'll just pause that while this finishes off. Okay, as you can see, that's simulated in, and we've got a bit of bisection going on here, but that's just because this cowl at the moment is fit, you know, exactly on to this model. So it's leaving no room at all for the cloth, but we can cheat here a little bit by just lifting it up a tad, of course by pulling the head off a bit, because we don't need this to be perfect for this stage. What we want to do is blow this around in the wind a bit maybe, and you know, make sure that this cowl is in approximately the right place. Obviously some cleanup is going to have to be done afterwards for things like this, but generally, you know, that's close enough. And what I tend to do, and a lot of people tend to do with stuff like this, is just scale down the cloth sort of to 0.998 or something, ever so slightly shorter, which takes care of a lot of those intersection issues. But for right now, let's go back to simulation. Okay, so now we can simulate a few, and you see the cloth there, it has intersected, so I'm just going to try and pull it down. There we go. Okay, and it seems like there's some sort of pin there. So I don't know what that... Ah, no, that's not a pin. That's the last place I grabbed it. My apologies. So occasionally you'll get these bisection issues. And really, without a much higher simulation quality, it's probably not going to go away that easily. But for what we want to show you here, that little bit of bisection there is not going to matter. I mean, if you keep giving it a yank, it'll just come away eventually. But all I want to show you now is some cape flapping in the breeze action. So we're going to go stop the simulation. And if you wanted higher quality to this as well, by the way, select the cloth that you want higher quality on. Now, you see here we've got a fabric tab, we've got a properties editor. So this is the selection for the cloth. These are the properties for the cloth. Okay, so if we wanted to, you know, give the cloth a different material, which we probably do, so let's do that now. Let's add a fabric. So fabric 1. And it's got a bunch of presets. So I'm thinking Batman's cape is much more leathery. I mean, he doesn't seem like he walks around with some sort of silk cape on. Much more kind of that really soft, supple leather, I would think. So I'm going to change this to leather, and I'm just going to leave its default settings. And if I hit simulate, you'll see that this material actually does change when you move it about, because now it will be leather. So in order to get it to resim, you've got to give it a bit of a yank. There we go. And I think I might have pulled that a bit too hard. But you'll see when it settles back out again, it comes down looking slightly thicker, slightly fuller. Okay, so we've got a different kind of drape here. And we've still got those bisection issues going on, but as you can see, I can just tease that back, and that little bit of roughness in the back there can be smoothed out in no time at all, just by scaling the fabric down a bit when you get it in Maya, or just by running the Maya smooth brush or the ZBrush smooth brush just across the back really quickly. Any time you get, you know, cloth trying to be sandwiched really tightly between two things, this is going to be an issue. We could also go back to the animation and just pull this hood back up a bit. There we go, as you can see. So it's quite funny now because we've got the two different, or we had the two different materials in there. So with the different material, I can see here that this stuff that's starting to intersect could all actually be pinned as well. So really, let's move that there. Let's go to simulation, and let's grab the material here. Here we go. Let's just try and grab that there and this here. And it's not doing it. So it looks like we could pin some of this as well. Let me just animation and move the head back off. But you can see it's quite useful to have this head here. We can move backwards and forwards now. And simulation. And let's try a bit more pinning in the back here. So we could try and pin sort of, it will be this area, I would think. There we go. Let's pin that area. So attach pin to avatar. That will attach those to the avatar. And back to simulation. And where are we? Simulation. There we go. Sorry, back to animation. Yeah, I lost my mind for a minute. And hit record again. So I'll just pause that while that kind of does its thing. Sorry, I'll pause the recording, not the animation, of course. Okay, so as you can see, well, we've got that pinning in place. There's less chance of bisection happening. Another thing that we could have done is we probably lowered the head down too quickly. So the bisection is happening because we haven't got enough frames on here. So if we'd given this, 300 frames to lower that head down and let it settle really slowly, that could have helped. It also could have helped if we had a closed model here, which you can obviously, with all the stuff Jay's taught you, fill the bottom of this up, or certainly just extrude it inwards a bit so it's got a bit more heft, a bit more clout to it when it clamps on the material to clamp it down. Because this edge here is a little thin for that particular process. But regardless, this is enough to get this next bit done. So let's go back to simulation. And we're using a pretty low quality sim here. I mean, you've seen how fast it is as well, so that's also going to lead to bisection. So if you clicked on a pattern and we change that fabric to leather, but I really feel that it's the same. I've watched that simulation happen and it kind of doesn't feel that much heavier. So if we click on our pattern and we go down here, we'll see the fabric is still on default fabric. So we move it to fabric 1, hit simulate, and you'll see immediately we start getting these lines here. Okay, all of this detail has come in because leather's obviously going to be a lot more heavyweight. These lines have thickened up. The whole appearance of the thing has got a bit thicker looking. Okay, so I did wonder about that. It did look slightly different when we moved it around there, but when it had all settled down during that animation process, it looked a bit too similar to the last one for my taste. So just one step. You can put a new fabric in, of course, but then you have to go to the material and tell it to use that fabric. So let's wait for that to resettle out, and that'll be enough. We're not going for, we know if we let it simulate, it will drape. So simulation properties under the material itself, under the pattern itself. So click the pattern, simulation properties, particle distance is realistically the mesh that will be generated plus the accuracy of the simulation. Because obviously if you've got meshes very close together, you're going to need a lot of accuracy in that simulation to make sure not too many bisections happen. So 20 is standard. I would never really go lower than, the lower you go, the more accurate it is. So personally, for 99% of things, I would never really go much lower than 10. 10 is kind of my default for this is the final animation. After that, the mesh starts to get ridiculously heavy. Kind of fine if you're working on machines with a huge amount of RAM and you're going to retopologize later and you just really need that massively fine detail. But for something like a cloak, even 20 is pretty good most of the time. 10 will be fine. So, we've got our basic cloak done. And I just wanted to show you the wind simulator within this for no other reason than I'll probably release this tutorial with Batman's cape blowing in the wind, and I'm sure it would be useful just to show how it's done. So this is really quite simple. Wind on, wind off, frequency. So how the wind is going to behave, turbulence, of course, how turbulent it is, decay when it falls off, what sort of shape is it blowing across in a planular fashion or probably spherical. Yeah, spherical. So we're just going to leave it on default, and we're going to hit this, and you'll see the cape start to blow about. And if we go around the back, you can see it's all being held nicely in place by that cowl. So that little bit of intersection doesn't really matter to us, because we're going to tweak this in Maya anyway when we get all the animation back in. And for right now, we just want that as a kind of placeholder object to stop this kind of blowing up around that proxy neck we've got. Now, as you can see, we've got our pinning here. Whoops, it's a little bit wrong. We have a little bit too much of it. Should have been pinned more around the cowl. And the same here. This part should have been a bit smaller so it fits under the cowl. So the devil is in the detail. But you don't really need me to hold your hand through adjusting a 0.1 millimeter to the right, I think. So there you go. We've got some cape blowing in the wind. Very simple. Marvelous Designer is truly, well, marvelous at this kind of thing. If you've got any sort of patterns or clothes that you need to animate, this is definitely the tool for the job at the moment. It's definitely the one to beat. Okay folks, sorry about the video jump there, but I actually got to the end of this tutorial and remembered we'd forgotten to discuss the piping. So here is our Batman cape again with the just basic drop down animation, and the cowl has obviously been lowered down. Now for this very simple thing, that cowl lowering wasn't strictly necessary, but it is very handy in so many situations. I thought I'd just throw it in. Now what we did forget, or what I forgot rather, as I say, was piping. So if you were to look at this edge corner on, like most cloth in 3D, it's actually razor sharp. And cloth normally has some sort of edge to it, so we're going to put a piping material around. Now in Marvelous Designer this is very, very simple. You go up to here and you've got your edit piping and then your add piping basically. So you'll see all around the outside of our cloth comes this dotted line, and that's where we can put piping. So if we start under the hood here, you'll see it highlights in blue, and if I go down, and I will go around the whole thing, so I can just trace around this whole thing and there'll come a center point where we'll have to go from the other direction. But if I just double click here, you'll see this puts a piped edge on. Now I'm going to have to get off the piping tool because with the blue line there you might not be able to see it, but you can definitely see it when it's highlighted in yellow. And this is just going to mean that we're not going to get that razor sharp edge. If you look at it now, it is actually round. Now if we go to edit our piping and we put the width up to say 15 millimeters, you can see it in much more detail. So now we've got a large piped edge round. So it really makes our cloak look like it's not at all one-dimensional plane. It looks much more like a much thicker material. And that's just a very, very simple way of doing that. Now we don't want a very big one for this. You just want to stop that catching that razor sharp edge you see in so much kind of 3D cloth. And this is a really easy way to do it. I believe this was a new feature for Marvelous Designer 5, so if you're using an older version, there are other ways of putting piping on, but it's not strictly necessary. Just double click there again and then I'll put a bunch more piping in. It is just there right now as an extra added little detail because it's so simple for us to put in. So if we get off, you'll see the piping's been added there as well. Okay, so we didn't get to look at quite a lot of the features of Marvelous Designer, but I think you'll agree, even with a very, very short introduction to Marvelous, you can really jump in there and start making simple stuff like cloaks, blankets, bedspreads. We do have an interiors and furniture tutorial on the site that goes into Marvelous Designer in a bit more detail if you're interested in using MD for furniture. So we used it for cloth covered chairs and bedspreads and towels and things like that. But for this Batman cape, it's absolutely ideal. It saves you a ton of work. I mean, the look of it, especially for a still shot, is so easy. It's like, I want a few more wrinkles there. I want it a bit more off the shoulder, or I want it a bit more on the shoulder. You could just really tug it around. And you've got different fabrics you can use, so if this one isn't to your liking, there's a denim preset which might be a bit better suited, or the silk, and so it really does not take a lot of effort. I mean, you can even grab stuff while it's in, if I can actually get hold of it, there we go. You can grab stuff while it's in motion and pull it around, simulate gusts of wind, and you've got the wind simulator within Marvelous. So I know we did a few bits like the animation for the cowl that weren't strictly necessary. I just thought they were fun to take a look at. Okay, and just to finish this one off, I'm going to come in and we're going to export our cape back into Maya, because it's all very well that it's here, but we want to take a look at a good way of getting it out of Marvelous. So I'm going to go ahead where we were pulling that about before and just let that settle down a bit. That's gone. I might have pulled it a bit too hard there, so let's just pull it back this way a tad. And again, you know, with this kind of thing, it does take a bit of time to get the look you want. It's, you know, miles faster than practically anything else on the market, but if you tug it too hard like I just did, if you're a little impatient, you could end up with it going, you know, a bit too fast. You can always grab it while it's in motion and sort of yank it back, but you could end up with this kind of tug-of-war thing going on. So sometimes it's better just to leave it. And I'm just going to leave that for a second while it simulates out back kind of in a drapery pattern again. So I'm just going to pause this video for 2 seconds while this simulates out. Okay, folks, that doesn't seem to be settling down much, so you know what I think we've done? And I thought it was a bit rowdy, because I really wasn't pulling it that hard. I think we've left the wind on. And we have. So make sure you turn your wind off, folks, if you want your patterns to settle back down again, because, you know, I've force 10 hurricane here, and that's not going to slow down ever. So of course that was a fairly light wind, but it was just, you know, enough to keep the cloak blowing in the breeze there. And we want one for our final shot here, which is going to be a bit more kind of flat. So once again, I'm just going to pause that video, but if you're following along with me and you had that wind thing ticked on and it just wasn't settling down, I thought I might be able to save you some time there, because I did sit looking at this thing for a minute or two going, that seems very strange, before I finally twigged it. So I'm going to let this settle down and maybe pull it about so it has slightly better bunching. There we go. You know, and we're set on leather now, so you're going to get less of the kind of really fine fine cloak type things and more of the kind of big folds that you'd see in leather, and less of the tiny wrinkles that you might get in, say, a silky material. Okay, but that's enough for now. Now you can go ahead and get whatever look you want. I think it's kind of cool that it's wrapping around the feet, and obviously if that's settled down it will fall down flat, but this is enough for the next bit. So we got this in Marvelous Designer, we want it in Maya. Now first things first, 20 for the final particle distance on the cloth is maybe a bit too high. You might want to drop that down to 15 just to get a bit of a finer simulation. But regardless, that's entirely up to you. The lower the particle distance, remember, the denser the mesh. So you're going to have to deal with that at some point. And also, you know, the more memory, the longer the simulation process, the less easy it gets to pull around. So really would wait to drop that particle distance until you've got kind of what you're looking for, and what you're looking for then is just finer details and softer cloth maybe. But this is absolutely fine for me for demonstration. So I'm going to go down the properties of this thing and set it from triangles to quads. Now it takes a lot longer to simulate on quads. It's not a good idea. You want to just do this quad when you go to export if you want quadded geometry. Now we're going to re-topo with J, so we're going to end up using this simply as a base anyway in this case, but it's always nice to have quads. So just before you export, set that to quads, and we want to go File, Export, of course, OBJ, because we don't want to export the animation right now, we just want to export the cloth. And navigate back to your project folder, and right here I'm going to put this in data because it's an object, and I'm going to call it Batman cloth. Okay, now I'm going to hit save, and this is going to, you know, start a synchronization process for saving the mesh. And again, this is partly because we're in quads, it's a bit slower, but what do we want to save? Well, we don't want to save the avatar because we've already got a copy of that, and this will have been triangulated when Marvelous Designer brought it in. So we want to keep the one we've got. We want to select all patterns. We've only got one, so it doesn't matter. We want them unwelded, so it doesn't try and join the piping or all the patterns together. Now that's again a personal choice, but me normally I leave everything unwelded, and if I need to put it together, I'll do that in Maya. But for now, we just want to make sure we're in meters, because we brought this in meters, so we want it out in meters, otherwise everything's all going to go a bit wrong, and I'm just going to hit OK, and there we go, we're exported. So now we go back to Maya and import it. Okay, so we're back in Maya here, and as you can see, we've got our little guy, and the problem is I'm going to import now, and of course our cape will be the right size. Yeah, there we go. So cloth, as we saved out the OBJ, and you can take a look at the mesh now. There it is in Maya, and it is quadded. It's not the best geometry in the world, but it'll do in a pinch, and I believe you're going to go over with Jay how to make that a bit better anyway. And one thing I would say is, if you've been watching Jay's tutorials, you've seen him in the past, and in fact if you've seen any of mine, you hear us both talk about topology an awful lot. And part of the reason for that is you'll see that I put Jay's mesh in that simulation program. We had no problem at all. The cloth didn't fall through it. There was absolutely no problems. The whole process was so simple. And if you have bad topology on a model, that doesn't happen. You run into so many problems further on down the pipeline. So if you are new to Maya and you've been wondering why everyone's so, you must get correct topology, it is animation, of course. It's required for animation, but it's also required for simulation. So, make sure that you always pay attention to your topology. You'll run into so many less problems. Now, one problem we do have. This is fine, but this is not the scale we were originally working at. So if I just handed this as an OBJ now to my modeler to retopologize it, or to Texture and Artist or whatnot, it's going to be the different size to everything else they've got. And then they're going to end up trying to scale it back to the right size. It's never going to be right. Everyone's going to be very annoyed, which is one of the reasons I told you to write down the number of what we scaled it down to. Now, when we reattach this, it would have left us with an empty group node. So if we look here, I think it's this one, 0.356, which is, I believe, what we scaled it down to. I think I made a note of that. I did 0.56, yeah, sorry, 0.356, yeah. So I know this is the right group node. So we've got no problems at all here, folks. All we need to do is select the meshes that we need in the group. So in this case, it's just actually the cloak. So I'm going to pop the cloak in that group, and I'm middle mouse button dragging that up to the group, and then I'm just going to scale that back up to 1. Boink. And we are done. Now I've done some work on this mesh here, so I can just get rid of it, and there is our cloak. Now the real test, of course, is if I import the original OBJ we used. So file, import, this cloak should fit it perfectly. So Batman force him, there we go, and a warning again about combined mesh, and there we go, our cloak does fit. We've got a little bit of bisection going on here, but Jay's going to show you how to clean that up. And the cloth is fairly tight to the body, so you're always going to have a few problems like this, because if you look at the cowl, it does actually bisect the mesh itself. So there was, in this case, no real way to simulate that cloth on top, but this is very easy to fix, which you'll be going over with Jay. Another simple way to do it is what a lot of people do, is just scale this cloak down just a tiny bit. So let's grab all these. These are 20809. Let's put them on 2.805. And that's scaled it down a little bit, and you can see we're immediately taking care of a great deal of that bisection there. Okay, now another way to do it would be to just simply lift the hood up a bit as well and extend it downwards. There are many techniques for dealing with these issues, but we're at the right scale now, which is the important thing to us. So when we hand this back, or indeed work with it ourselves, we haven't got any of this guesswork of having it down here and then going, I think it was about somewhere around, maybe there. No, it wasn't. And you can end up, especially with more complex stuff, it just takes ages and ages to get it in there. So this is not the exact piece of cloth that Jay will be working with, just because of the way we've divided this tutorial up. So I went ahead and made one for him earlier using exactly the same technique. It will have slightly different drapery, and I'll make that one available to you guys in the data folder, so you can follow along exactly with Jay and just make the process a bit easier for you. Right, so I hope that's taught you something about Marvelous Designer, specifically that it's really worth learning if you're going to do anything with cloth. That includes clothes, simple, anything, even simple curtains. I mean, I think Marvelous Designer has now a rental price of around $49 a month. So if you're doing a project and you just want to get a bunch of cloth done, you can rent it for a month. The buy price for a perpetual license isn't that expensive. I think it's around $400 or $500. So I mean, well worth getting. It is pretty much used everywhere in the industry as well. So if you're looking to make a break into film and TV, it's a nice thing to have on the CV that you know how to use it. I would definitely recommend it for a time-saving application as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand you back off to Jay, and I really hope you found something interesting in here. Thank you very much for watching. Oh, okay, and yeah, if we smooth the mesh, of course, we'll drop a bit more by section because Marvelous Designer used a smooth mesh. Anyway, just I'd forgotten that bit, or rather, I didn't mention it before. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll hand you back over to Jay. Cheers.